Before we dive into today's episode, I want to share something really exciting. The Summer Solstice Summit is back. This is the second annual gathering where tarot readers, witches, therapists, and creative practitioners come together for a weekend of learning, reflection, and magic. This year's summit takes place June 26th through the 28th, and we have an incredible lineup. Presenters are going to be exploring topics like advanced tarot systems, ancestry and death work, psychology and creative practice, expanded divination methods, and so much more. It's a 3-day virtual event, which means you can join us from anywhere in the world because it's happening over Zoom. And if you can't attend live, every session is recorded so you can watch at your own pace. So if you love the intersection of tarot, psychology, ritual, and creativity, this weekend will be so fulfilling and inspiring for you. The feedback from last year's summit was so overwhelmingly positive. Folks were buzzing for months as they implemented everything that they learned and said that the energy was so magical and supportive and warm. You can learn more and grab your ticket at thetarotdiagnosis.com/summer solstice or via the link in the show notes. I hope to see you all there. You are listening to The Tarot Diagnosis. I'm your host, Shannon. I'm a licensed psychotherapist, and I also happen to have a love for tarot. Each episode, I invite you to reflect with me as I work to demystify the tarot and the human experience, all while exploring tarot's connection to mental and emotional health. While this podcast may feel therapeutic, it is not meant to take the place of psychotherapy. So grab your cards and join me as I work to create a pathway to better understand ourselves and those around us. Well, hello. We are back after taking a few weeks off, which wasn't planned, but it is what it is. I've been super busy lately preparing for the Summer Solstice Summit and just juggling life, my private practice, the tarot diagnosis. And to be honest, my creativity, I feel like, has been waning lately. So every time I did sit down to maybe brainstorm a podcast episode or really do anything, my brain was like, nope, I've got nothing. At one point over the last few weeks, I realized I hadn't even painted in, oh my God, I think it was like 4 months. It could have been longer. And for weeks, I've been telling myself, you're going to paint, you're going to sit down and paint. And I haven't, but I did finally force myself a couple days ago. So that was a success. Well, the painting wasn't a success, but the fact that I sat down and put brush to paper was a big deal. And I do think that kind of helped get some of my creativity moving and my writer's block maybe slightly less because of it. But yeah, it's interesting. I mean, in creativity blocks, writer's blocks, I've experienced those my whole life. Anyone who is creative knows what that's like. I mean, before I made the switch to psychology and to be a therapist, I was a writer. I was a music journalist. So I was writing poetry and short stories and interviewing musicians. So writer's block is something that I am very familiar with, but it is always still a little scary when you do sit down to write or paint or in this case, sit down and talk in front of a microphone and your brain just powers down. Even though you know what's happening, it is still a little scary. So yeah, that's been happening. That's what's going on in my brain lately. And you know, like I said, I did sit down and paint to see if that would help, but eventually I just decided to do what I would have told anyone else to do and what felt like the easiest, most obvious solution. And that was to sit down and just shuffle some cards and pull and see what comes up. So I did that last night and all the cards that I pulled were court cards, which I thought was interesting. And then that got me thinking about a workshop I did in February on the court cards. And I figured, well, okay, I'm pulling court cards. It's making me think of the workshop I just did. I really enjoyed nerding out creating that workshop. So what if I brought it to the podcast? Plus, it would give those of you who are not a part of the symposium an opportunity to get a glimpse into what my monthly workshop content is like. If you're not familiar, the symposium is the tarot diagnosis little membership community. It's this quaint little community where those of us tarot and psychology nerds gather and we hang out. And yeah, I put a workshop on each month, and then we'll do a reading room where we read for each other, and then a book club where we explore 2 different cards through a different tarot author each month. It's super fun. And then I don't host the workshops every month. I host the majority of them, but often I'll bring in a guest workshop host. Actually, in fact, in April of 2026, if you're listening to this recently, Meg Jones-Wall from 3am Tarot is going to be our guest workshop facilitator for April. And they are going to be talking about tarot numerology, which I'm so excited about because I feel like my numerology knowledge, especially when it comes to tarot, is so minor compared to where I wish it was. So I'm super looking forward to their brain and what they're going to bring to the workshop. So that'll be super fun. But yeah, so I figured, you know what? Let's just explore all of this meaty workshop content that we did in the symposium related to the court cards on the podcast. So, and yeah, because this workshop was pretty in depth, I won't be getting into all of it. Plus it was experiential. So folks were working together on the different exercises, and obviously that can't translate here because it's just me, but I figured I could at least pull some cards and show how the exercises might work. And this particular workshop, I looked at the court cards through 3 different lenses, but I'm only going to explore 2 of those on the podcast just for time's sake. But the first one is the court cards through psychosocial development. And then the second is through Jungian psychoanalysis. And I mean, honestly, both of these probably could have their own like hour-long podcast or workshop. So we are just going to be doing kind of like an introduction into it, but you'll still get a lot of depth out of it. All right, so let's start by talking about psychosocial development and the court cards specifically through this framework. If you've ever taken an intro to psychology class, you have probably at least been introduced to this idea. It's one of my favorite types of development to reference. I reference it a lot, honestly, in my work with clients therapeutically, more than I thought I would. But there's so much that comes up throughout life stages. And then I immediately think, oh yeah, that's, this stage of psychosocial development. And then I use that as an opportunity for some psychoeducation with clients. And then, it always sparks interesting discussion about what that means. Especially because anytime we're experiencing something, we forget that experience is probably not unique to us and that it is probably a natural human experience that other people have gone through, are currently going through. And so when I frame it through the lens of being attached to a stage of psychosocial development, I always see clients kind of just like relax their body for a moment and almost experience a sense of relief of like, oh, okay, I'm not broken or something's not wrong with me. This is kind of just a normal part of human development. And I feel like that translates so well into the court cards. So the theory of psychosocial development, the stages of development, was created by psychoanalyst Erik Erikson. And he believed that the human experience kind of unfolded through a series of psychosocial stages. And each stage was actually marked by a central question. And that central question shaped how we relate to ourselves and other people. So the later stages of psychosocial development, which are identity, intimacy, generativity, and integrity, I feel like relate to the court cards because they carry this kind of like psychological weight of adolescence and adulthood and reflect these real lived kind of internal and external conflicts. And also because they shape our relationships, careers, creativity, and ultimately just our relationship to our own life story. So when we look at these kind of later stages through the lens of tarot, The court cards, which of course the pages, the knights, the queens, and the kings, start to represent more than just people or personalities, which is what we tend to look at the court cards as representing. And they become more of a developmental archetype. And each of these developmental archetypes relate to the pages, the knights, the queens, and the kings. So, for example, the pages can embody the experience of identity formation. The knights represent moving towards closeness and kind of testing relationship experiences. The queens then are holding and maintaining responsibility for being creative and contributing to society. And then the kings are in this kind of like authority spot of reflection and integration. And so when we look at all of these together, we can really map out the human lifespan through a psychosocial developmental lens. Something that I think is really important to remember, though, is that these psychosocial stages, even though Erik Erikson associated them with different age ranges, like particular age ranges, in fact, I have seen and research shows we revisit these stages and the tensions that are present within them throughout our life. So even though the pages might be related to adolescence and a developmental stage around, or developmental experience rather, around that age, we can still experience that same developmental journey even if we are in midlife. So if the pages, for example, represented identity, we could be questioning our identity in midlife. It doesn't mean that, we've regressed. It just means that we are re-experiencing maybe in a different way that developmental psychosocial stage. And likewise, a young adult might end up confronting integrity, which is something we likely wouldn't see until later on in development. So yeah, it's not always linear. And something else is we could be experiencing multiple of these stages at once. We don't just get to kind of like neatly work through them. And, the court cards, just like our psyche and psychosocial development, I believe exist on this spiral. It's not just a linear path forward. So there are 8 total stages for Erikson's theory. However, the court cards really only reflect 5 through 8. So that's what we're going to be looking at. So a few moments ago, I mentioned that Erik Erikson believed that there was kind of a core question that could be assigned to each of these psychosocial stages. So if we are applying them to the court cards, these core questions would be, who am I becoming, related to the pages? Who or how can I love without disappearing or losing myself? That's the knights. What will I leave behind, is the queens. And when I look back, will I feel whole? And that's the kings. So let's look at stage 5. So stage 5, again, is identity versus role confusion. So we typically see this between age 12 to 20, and it's associated with the pages. And, the energy of the pages represent, usually if we're looking about this through age, adolescence. And the central question here is, who am I? Again, identity development. So this is where we're exploring belief systems, things we enjoy, our hobbies, our interests, the roles that we play socially or within our family. It's a time that is accompanied by a lot of curiosity, experimentation, lots of experimenting, and there can even be some contradiction. And I think during this stage, we forget that contradiction is actually really important because of the experimentation that we're going through during these ages. So we might say one thing and then do another, or do one thing and it contradicts what we're saying, because we are trying to figure out, who are we? What do we like? What feels right? We're trying a lot of things on during this time. We're testing boundaries. We're questioning the values that we've inherited from our families. And we're looking to our friends, our peer group, for reassurance as we are trying to figure out how to shape and create our own personal worldview. But ultimately, the pages tell us that identity is discovered through this ability to be curious and engaged with the world around us, which I think is really important. Then we have stage 6. And stage 6, I believe, is associated with the Knights because it's intimacy versus isolation. And typically we see this between 18-ish to 40, 20 to 40. These age ranges can vary. And again, you can be experiencing these at different stages or different ages. So don't be married to the age ranges. But Erikson's stage of intimacy versus isolation represents kind of that early adulthood phase. And there's a lot of movement happening here, especially as it relates to relationships. And we see that a lot in the Knights. And the core question that's attached to this stage is, can I move towards another person without losing myself? And so this developmental period, we're exploring our emotional vulnerability, romantic and platonic relationships, our commitment levels, and our risk. How much risk are we willing to take? So during this stage, we are bringing with us that identity that we formed during that page adolescence identity phase. And there's a lot of courage that is required during this intimacy versus isolation. And I always associate the word courage with the Knights, but the courage is required because we are stepping out of the independence or that kind of like solo exploration of the pages and entering into a shared space where we are kind of seeing how we feel with closeness to somebody else. And there's always some sort of risk of rejection during this time. And so we have to be able to tolerate that and have the courage to potentially be rejected and the courage to be able to withstand some levels of ambiguity. Next, we have stage 7. So this is generativity versus stagnation. And I associate this with the queens. So we're probably seeing this around age 40 to 65. This is a developmental stage that focuses on creation and stewardship. And the core kind of question here is, what am I creating that is going to outlast me? So during this stage, we're really exploring what type of contribution are we providing to the world, to our families. There's a lot of kind of mentorship and guidance happening here. It could be about parenting, and this is literal or symbolic. It doesn't have to be about, oh, you are a parent. You could be reparenting yourself. You could be parenting people around you. This is also a time of community involvement and legacy building. So again, what am I creating that will outlast me? This stage has a strong instinct to guide, to protect, and to invest. And that investment, not just monetary, invest in our life, our career, our partnerships, our friendships, activism, creativity. When this stage is what we would call resolved, when we're talking about this from a psychological standpoint, we feel useful, we feel engaged, we feel connected rather, and satisfied with what is unfolding in our life and our role in that. And then finally, we have stage 8, and that's the last stage, and that's integrity versus despair. And this is usually age 65 to death. And I associate this with the kings. So I associate this with the kings because they're this representation of authority, especially kind of like elder authority, but it also represents integration. And we know that the kings typically represent the integration of what we have learned in that suit. And so this developmental period is usually exploring our life and kind of doing a life review. Do we feel a level of acceptance for what our life was and what we created and what we did and how we used our time? Are we at peace with the fact that we are imperfect humans and that when we do this kind of life review, that not everything is going to be happy and not everything is going to be completely satisfactory? What's interesting about this stage, especially with it being the final stage, is it's less about expansion. And again, more about just feeling whole and integrated. So the kings are sitting with the totality of life. Again, like the risks we've taken or the risks we've avoided, the relationships that we've kept or lost, the mistakes we've made, the systems and structures that we've built, or the systems and structures that we have perpetuated. And this stage, there's no chasing, there's no running. It's just about reckoning. So in the workshop, this is the kind of the part where I introduced 4 different tarot spreads based on each stage. I'm not going to go through all of those spreads here. There's not enough time. If you're interested in that, you can join the symposium. All these workshops are recorded, and there's a workbook that accompanies them. So even if you don't want to watch the recording, you can at least go through the workbook on your own. So what I'm going to do is, I think I'm going to do stage 6, the Knights. This one was a quick 2-card spread. And the way that the spreads worked for each of the developmental stages was representing, obviously, the energy of that stage. And so the questions that we're pulling to speak to the tension that exists in that psychosocial developmental aspect of life. So stage 6 was the Knights. That's intimacy versus isolation. So if you were pulling along with me, you're just going to pull 2 cards. Card 1 is going to be, where do I let people see me fully? And then card 2 is, where do I withhold? I'm going to shuffle and pull and see what comes up for us. Per usual, using Tarot Vintage. I am going to start using some other decks, especially when I do my month ahead collective readings, which I'm really excited about for April. I haven't quite decided what deck I'm going to use yet, but I don't know. I have a couple in mind. So again, stage 6, intimacy versus isolation. Card 1, where do I let people see me fully? Okay, the 10 of Swords reversed. Now let's pull for card 2. Where do I withhold? The High Priestess. Interesting. Okay. I actually love the 10 of Swords reversed. I think it's such a fascinating card to explore. I feel like there's so many avenues we could take. But if we're looking at this through, where do I let people see me fully? Oh my gosh. Okay. So every time I see the 10 of Swords reversed, I think of that. I don't know. Is it like a magician's trick or something? I don't know. You know, the bed of nails, and you can fully lay on this bed of, pointed nails and not be impaled somehow. Really, I think I don't know, is that physics? Being able to maneuver and position our body weight in a way that, we're not harmed. That's what I think of when I see the 10 of Swords reversed. And so where do I let people see me fully? This could represent someone who maybe lets people know that they are uncomfortable and that they are maybe navigating something that is a little tricky and they have to be very cautious. And maybe it's not the place they want to be in. So they're not hiding that, like, hey, I'm a little uncomfortable right now. So perhaps that's what that represents. But then we have, where do I withhold? And these two together are interesting. And as the High Priestess, especially next to this reverse 10 of Swords, it immediately makes me think of, okay, but this person doesn't fully explain how uncomfortable they are feeling or how much pain it might be to be balancing on these 10 swords right now. And yeah, it's fascinating to see these two next to each other, especially from a color perspective. So if you get my emails with the episode announcement, you will have seen this photo. But when you're looking at these, especially with the Tarot Vintage, the black and white colors are very prominent. So, of course, in the High Priestess, the pillars, one is black, one is white. But in the 10 of Swords, it's reversed, we have all that black on the bottom, and then we have white on the top. So we are seeing the duality here, but we're seeing top to bottom versus side to side, which I don't know. I feel like I could spend a lot of time even just like nerding out over that right now. But back to the questions. So with the High Priestess, what do I withhold? I think this is saying during this stage, especially because it's related to intimacy versus isolation, perhaps you're afraid to fully explain the pain you're experiencing or the discomfort you're experiencing because you don't want to lose someone. You don't want to push someone away, which is so common during this stage when we are either in a new relationship or wanting to maintain a relationship. And we're afraid that if we are fully open and vulnerable with somebody, we will be too much for them to handle, or they'll want to run away, that they won't be able to hold or contain the true depth of our own pain and suffering. So yeah, just some light, easy cards for this stage. No big deal, right? So that is an example of what an exercise would have looked like for stage 6, intimacy versus isolation with the knights. So the next aspect of working with the court cards in this workshop that I explored was the 4 stages of transformation in Jungian psychoanalysis. Again, this is super meaty, so I'm not going to get into all of it. If you're interested in this, or you're like, oh, I want to learn more, all of this is inside the symposium. You can get the full workbook and watch the recording there. But I am just going to at least go over briefly how each of the courts relate to this concept of Jungian psychoanalysis. So just to give a quick overview, the 4 stages of transformation through a Jungian psychoanalytic lens is confession or catharsis. That's stage 1. Stage 2 would be elucidation. Stage 3 is education. And then stage 4 is transformation. So confession, catharsis would be the pages, elucidation would be the knights, education would be the queens, and transformation, the kings. So the pages correspond to confession and catharsis because there's usually this moment, if we're thinking about this through a psychoanalytic lens or in psychoanalysis, when some sort of previously unconscious material comes up to the surface. And we have this realization, we have this cathartic moment, we make a confession. And so this is the representation of the psyche being at that threshold of full awareness. And then, so that's the pages. So it's a very beginning, early stage. And then we move into the knights. And the knights are representing elucidation, which is basically our ability to kind of actively investigate what we have just discovered. So this is when we start examining patterns. We start looking at defenses, projections, complexes, any sort of unconscious dynamics that have related to this moment or this level of awareness that we've just experienced. And then the queens reflect education and integration. So this is when the ego is consciously engaging with the discovered material from the stage of the page. This is where we're gaining insight and emotion, and there's reason brought into kind of dialogue with the self. And then, of course, we have the kings representing transformation. So this is when we are integrating all that insight that we've gained from the pages, knights, and queens and applying it into lived experience. So, for example, the material that we discovered through the stage of catharsis with the pages is no longer dominating us from a shadow perspective, for example. It's no longer in our unconscious world. It's incorporated fully into the self. And this stage of the kings is where we go from being reactive to responsive. So the exercise that was attached to this section of the workshop was really fun. I enjoyed this. It's also way too much to do on the podcast right now, but I had folks build out their own Jungian psychoanalytic tarot spread. So basically, they shuffled their deck and went through and set aside the first page, knight, queen, and king that they saw. And then they created their own spread based on the corresponding questions that I've attached to every single court card. So we're not going to do that right now, but what I am going to do is shuffle and find the very first court card that I see, and then we will explore the question that I've attached to that court card. And so what I mean by going through your deck and finding the first court card is literally just flipping over your cards until, okay, I already found one. 4 cards in. Flipping over your cards or just like starting from the bottom, whatever you prefer, doesn't matter. And pulling out the first court card you see. So the first court card I saw was the Knight of Swords. So the question associated with the Knight of Swords is, where am I reacting too quickly in order to avoid being perceived as weak? So you could sit with this yourself and reflect, or if you were building your spread, that would have been your question, and then you would have pulled another card to answer it. So let's do that now. 3 of Pentacles. Interesting. Okay, so the question was, where am I reacting too quickly to avoid being perceived as weak? 3 of Pentacles. Okay, so this feels like when you're in a group setting or when you're working together with folks, feeling like you have to be the one that has the right answer. You have to be the one that has the best idea because you're afraid of being seen as weak, or maybe not as smart or not as capable. And so here might be a good idea to reflect on, okay, how can I create space? And again, this is a Knight card. So if we go back to the original psychosocial developmental stage, this stage was intimacy versus isolation. So how can I be close to someone without losing myself? And then we pull the 3 of Pentacles and it's like, oh, this is a clear reflection of that psychosocial development and that fear of how can I be, in a group setting or work with folks and not be forgotten. And so a question here would be, okay, what would it look like to hold space for someone else's ideas and someone else's experience, and also trust that they will hold space for my ideas and my experience, and then be able to have some level of discernment and be able to look around and say, wait, are these people actually doing that? What does that look like when they do that? What does it feel like? Not everyone is going to be as developed as you are. So if you are someone who can hold space for someone else's thoughts and ideas and not worry about becoming invisible or being forgotten, then, but other people can't, maybe those aren't your people and it's time to move on to a different group. So yeah, again, this is just a glimpse into that exercise. There was a whole spread that folks developed, a 4-card spread, which was really fun. All right. Well, that was a very quick look into how the court cards could move beyond just representing people or personality types and actually represent the stages of psychosocial development and the stages of transformation in Jungian psychoanalysis. So I hope that you all enjoyed this window into experiencing the court cards through a different lens. Thank you so much for listening to the Tarot Diagnosis. For more tarot and mental health content, follow the Tarot Diagnosis on Instagram. You can also subscribe to the podcast so you never miss an episode, and sign up to receive the Tarot Diagnosis emails, where you'll have access to exclusive spreads and exciting announcements. To join an incredible community of tarot and psychology enthusiasts, join the Tarot Diagnosis membership community, The Symposium, by visiting thetarotdiagnosis.com.